Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Bible study. We are talking about Psalm 131 today. We just have 3 verses. It's really, really short. Hopefully, you've read it already. But there's some explaining, I guess, that we have to do in our outline to make sense of some of it. There's an illustration or a metaphor that's used that's a little bit challenging to understand, I think, at least for me. So we'll talk about that in the outline section. But as far as our first page goes, once again for this psalm, we don't have an author named, and so we don't know exactly who wrote it, and we don't have any New Testament references that I'm aware of. Our one theme for today is going to be a rejection of pride and a haughty heart. The author of Psalm 131 compares himself to a child who is humble and quiet. And then our definition section, we have 2. One of them we have looked at several times. That is a song of ascent. A song of ascent, probably what that's referring to is a psalm that was sung by the people of Israel as they were ascending the mountain to go up to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was on top of a hill or a mountain. They were going up. Why were they going to Jerusalem? To keep the feast days that were prescribed in God's laws. So a lot of people think the Psalms of Ascent were the psalms that they sung as they were going to Jerusalem couple times a year. All right, and then we have the word weaned, which, I don't know, maybe we use that still in like motherhood Facebook groups or something, but it's not one that I come across on a daily basis, so I thought I would put it in here. Weaned appears in verse 2. A weaned child is one that has transitioned from drinking breast milk to another form of food. All right, so let's break down our 3 verses today. I've entitled this chapter, A Humble and a Quiet Spirit. So Psalm 131 is an expression of humility, and we don't know who wrote it, we don't know when it was written, and we don't know why it was written, but as you read it, you can kind of see that, maybe it came about, the author perhaps was being accused of being arrogant, and he wanted to respond back to those accusations. That's possible. The psalmist wrote as if he was speaking to the Lord, and he told God that he wasn't arrogant, he wasn't haughty, and he wasn't a man who was sinfully ambitious. He writes this, quote, "O Lord, my heart is not lifted up, my eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me." That's verse 1. He compares himself to a calm and a quiet child, a weaned child. There's a lot of discussion about what the author was intending to communicate to the reader through this metaphor, this illustration, but the meaning might be that unlike a newborn baby that embraces its mother for nourishment because it wants milk, right, and is discontented and cries until it finds said milk, a weaned child doesn't go to its mother for that same purpose. It's not discontented in that way. It doesn't seek her out just for that purpose. A weaned child can embrace its mother solely out of love. It seeks nothing but its mother's presence. So the author's soul was quiet and contented like that weaned child. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, I have a weaned toddler, and I would not describe them as quiet and contented. If that's the case, I understand. I think the illustration is just meant to communicate something very specific, right, in that comparison between the baby and the weaned child. So that's my best shot at it. Let me know down in the comments if you've heard another explanation, or maybe you mothers out there can think of one that I haven't thought of. But that's what I've got for you today. That's what I think he's trying to communicate. He then concluded the psalm encouraging Israel to put their hope in the Lord. He wrote, "O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore." And so that is the end of our short Psalm 131. So for our application today, I was thinking about this phrase that the author uses, that he doesn't occupy himself with things that are too great or too marvelous for him. And I was like, well, what does that mean exactly? Because, we should be trying to, think deeply and profoundly about things. So, what kind of application could we take from that? One application that I was thinking about that I see people get caught up in sometimes is when people spend all their time and their brain power hyper-focused on the spiritual realm and spiritual mysteries that God hasn't provided us insight into. I think that might be an example of somebody who is spending all their time thinking about things that are too great for them. Now, I want to clarify this. I don't want you to get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with trying to understand the spiritual realm. There are certain verses in the scriptures where God gives us details about the spiritual realm, and I think we're supposed to think about them and try to make as much sense of it as we can. But that being said, the information the Bible gives us is limited. God has not seen fit to share every single detail about every spiritual being out there and how they operate and how they interact in our world. And yet, sometimes we see people, and these people are especially popular, I think, on YouTube, social media, and prophetic channels and things like that, and they certainly get more views than me. And that's because the subject matter is really fascinating. But a lot of times what ends up happening is they start making these wild speculations about what goes on between angels and demons, good and evil, the origins of some of these beings and things in the heavenly realm, and details about heavenly places, right? They take this limited information and they make these wide speculations. Some of these people write books and courses, and they influence other people, and they make whole careers by speaking authoritatively about things that they don't know anything about. Some people waste hundreds of hours of their lives speculating about the spiritual realm rather than, and I think this is where it becomes a mistake, rather than actually applying and living out the clear things, the clear instructions that God gives us for how to live in the physical realm. Those who obsess over what God has not seen fit to give us details about probably fall into this camp of occupying themselves with things that are too great and too marvelous for them. We are so small, we are so limited, and we are so simple that trying to peer into spaces of the spiritual realm that God has not revealed is really nothing short of presumptuous. So we just have to be careful about that. Again, there can be some really fruitful studies there, but let's be careful that we're not spending all our time trying to figure out things that God hasn't told us to the detriment of our application of the things that God has told us.